the property management industry, fair housing offenses are considered especially troubling. In the United States, a dedicated fair housing attorney, Leslie Tucker, provides case explanations and best practices. These are some cases.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Fair Housing Insiders Case Files, Episode 10 with Leslie Tucker, the principal at Williams, Edelstein, and Tucker, and I'm your host, Jonathan Sarr. Leslie, today we're talking about a case between a group home and a private homeowners association. So this case kind of brings to light some very interesting points when it comes to limiting residents with disabilities. So what were your thoughts when you read over this case file?
So this is a land use case. This has been litigated for over 3 years and is still ongoing. It involves a proposed group home, an assisted living home, and it's intended to house a small number of disabled seniors, about 9. The group home was to be located within this high-end, exclusive residential community that's on a private island that's overseen by an HOA. The HOA is the defendant in this case. The owner of the lot where this property is located obtained county approval on permits to convert the house to an assisted living group home. So, of course, those renovations would involve things like building ramps, lots of interior renovations, accessible parking, accessible entrances, things like that. Mm-hmm. So several weeks after construction began on the property, and I think construction was slated to last about 3 months. So several weeks after they began, the HOA sent a letter to the group home operator, the plaintiff in this case, stating that they could not proceed with this project. And the reason that they gave was that the covenants in this community prohibit single-family homes from being used for a commercial purpose. And they said that this assisted living group home constituted a commercial purpose. So, therefore, they would no longer be giving access to any of the contractors to enter the community to, continue with the work. The group home operator said, no, this is not a commercial operation. This is being used for purely a residential purpose since, the occupants of the assisted living group home were using it as a residence. Ultimately, however, they said, okay, fine, if you're going to consider this a commercial purpose and that violates your covenants, we're going to request a reasonable accommodation in that you grant us a waiver of that covenant to allow us to run this group home in the community. Ultimately, the HOA said, yes, we will approve your reasonable accommodation to grant this waiver, but we're going to insist on a number of conditions in order for this to move forward. And there were lots of different conditions. Some of them were related to, a general liability policy that they had to hold, up to $1 million. They had to provide annual septic certifications for the property and install a special meter that, monitored, and gave daily reports. They required that any future actions or claims related to this be subject to arbitration, and that both sides had to hold $100,000 in escrow to cover future damages and things like that. So there were lots of different conditions. And the group home operator did agree to many of the conditions, but, put their foot down on a few of them, which ultimately prevented the agreement from going forward. So, this put them kind of back at square one. The group home ultimately was not able to move forward because the renovations were not able to move forward. And this case is still in active litigation.
Okay. Yeah, another complicated one. So
yeah.
I'm glad you help us get us summarize it and see what's going on. So a question for you then. A lot of history here. So if the assisted living home would be utilizing the property differently than what it was initially intended, why can't the HOA impose different requirements?
Well, I think that the HOA imposing different requirements isn't necessarily in and of itself unreasonable. I think for this particular case, the court is going to have to decide, were these requirements inherently unreasonable? And there's going to be a number of things that the court is going to have to look at and to consider in determining this case. Some of these factors might be, would the conversion to, from a single family home to a group home, would that impose undue financial and administrative burdens on the HOA? If so, maybe this reasonable accommodation isn't reasonable. Mm-hmm. Another might be, do the conditions constitute an alternative accommodation offer, right? So when you get in a request for a reasonable accommodation, a lot of times housing providers may not find it to be reasonable, but then offer something in the alternative. So if these conditions are looked at as an alternative offer, the question then is, do they still afford these disabled individuals an equal opportunity to use and enjoy this dwelling? If ultimately the conditions end up straining the group home's operation. So that's another important consideration. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, I think that if the court finds that the conditions that were imposed place such a burden on the operation of the group home that the group home can't operate in this community and they have to move to a different location, that will, that could likely be found to have violated the Fair Housing Act. And that's really because even though, this group home may exist somewhere else, all individuals with disabilities, they have the right to housing of their choice, to live where they want to live, as long as they qualify for that housing. So if these actions taken ultimately prevented this group home from opening and providing homes for these disabled individuals, ultimately their choice has been taken away. So I think those are all important factors, and we'll just have to see how this case ends up.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, we'll have a follow-up to it once the case is concluded, to get your comments on it once the court makes their decision. But yeah, thank you again. Appreciate your insights into another case file. And thank you everyone for tuning in to our show. This is the Fair Housing Insiders, episode 10, Case Files. Take care, everyone. We'll see you soon.